Welcome back. For months, Governor Ron DeSantis has been threatening elected officials with removal from office if they do not sign what is known as a 287G agreement, which allows ICE to take control of local police departments to conduct immigration raids. South Miami Mayor Javier Fernandez has challenged the governor, and I had a chance to speak to him this week.
The AG and the governor have been embarked on this campaign of coercion, really, to try to force jurisdictions to sign these supposedly voluntary agreements. And so in their communications, they've reiterated that there's a state mandate essentially to do this, but that, in our opinion, seemed to fly in the face of the actual law. So what we did was we asked the court to clarify for us what the law requires. Are we required as a jurisdiction to sign a 287G agreement in order not to violate the state sanctuary policies? That's essentially the question for the court.
In other words, something can't be both voluntary and mandatory at the same time. And so if it's mandatory, then, you obviously know the path that you have to take and you'll do that. If it's voluntary, then it's worth having your council make a decision, your commission make a decision as to whether or not you want to enter into a voluntary agreement. But the way yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and my hope is to avoid what's happened in Fort Myers and in Key West in large measure, where cities are forced under coercive conditions to make a policy determination. I mean, the perversity of what happened in Key West is that their police chief signed an agreement without authorization. The only thing the Key West Commission did was void that agreement because it was not done with any authority in law. So they could have a conversation about what they wanted to do next. And as soon as that happened, you saw the reaction on the part of the governor and his attorney general. And under those conditions where they were being threatened with removal from office, they essentially capitulated and signed an agreement that I believe strongly is not required. And the best evidence that we have is what the governor asked of the state legislature in that special session and what they actually adopted, which was not his proposal. His original proposal, Jim, as you may remember, was to require any jurisdiction with more than 25 officers to assign 10% of their officers to support immigration enforcement in this manner. That was never adopted. And so the language, we believe, is very clear. We're not required to do these things. Our hope is that the court will affirm our reading so that other cities, and even us, can have a conversation without the duress or coercion and make a decision about how we want to support these efforts, if at all.
So let's assume that it is voluntary, that the courts side with you. What do you envision happening? What would your position be? Do you want to proceed with signing these 287G agreements with the state, with the federal government, with ICE? How do you intend to proceed if it is in fact voluntary?
Look, Jim, I think I started this conversation just reading the agreement, and the agreement is full of holes for cities. We're going to expand our mission to help the federal government accomplish whatever its goals are with respect to immigration enforcement. But we get no protection. We get no indemnification from claims brought by third parties who may be illegally detained. And we've seen over the last few months just how haphazardly the administration has conducted its deportation program. I don't want to buy my city that kind of liability. I don't see the virtue in doing this. And I think there are other very fundamental questions about the nature of our local law enforcement that could be impacted by our involvement in these kinds of efforts. Cops can be good guys. For the most part, in my community, we love our police force. They're one of the reasons we exist, probably the highest rated service we have. And that's because our officers are seen as our protectors, the stewards of justice here in our community. And my concern is, unfortunately, this is no aspersion on the good men and women that may be working at ICE. Their role is one of confrontation and conflict. They're never coming to deliver good news. It's typically an extraction exercise from someone in a neighborhood. That really, if our officers are involved in that work, it really changes the nature and the perception of who they are and what they're about in our community. And I think that's a conversation we should have about whether these kind of efforts reinforce the basic community trust that's essential to community policing efforts here in Miami-Dade County and in South Miami specifically.
Well, what kind of a leader is it who has to lead through bullying, through threats, through intimidation? If the argument is so compelling, you would think that the governor and others would be able to make the compelling argument as opposed to threatening and basically extorting municipal leaders such as yourself to comply with their will.
Jim, look, I think Sheriff Tony and Broward said it best. We are all about getting bad guys off the street. We are concerned that for many years our state attorney's office has been under resourced in terms of having the prosecutors to prosecute the people that were picked up. So we're glad to see that there were some gains made this session in increasing salaries. We want bad people off the streets. We are concerned first and foremost with funding our police and making sure that our community is safe and secure, because from there springs prosperity. So that's at the heart of our mission, whether you're here legally or illegally. If you're doing something wrong in South Miami, or I venture to say any other city in our great county, most jurisdictions, if not all, are taking efforts to have you removed and have you prosecuted in accordance with the law. I don't understand why we're expending, a ton of state resources. To me, it's appalling that we're spending $450 million on a detention center in the Everglades to house 1,000 people, only 6 of which are criminals. That's more money, Jim, than the state spends on affordable housing. And we are in the middle of an affordable housing crisis today, right? So it just speaks to me of misaligned priorities, and priorities that they're advancing that are self-serving politically, not advancing the interests of our state and our communities.
When we come back, we will talk to the Democratic candidate for State Attorney General. Stay with us.